Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome to APAD Talks. Welcome to the Park Avenue Armory. My name is Andra Russick. I am the chair of the Education Committee, and I am thrilled to be introducing this talk today. We have two amazing artists with us. We have Shelley Niro. I'm gonna give you a, there we go. And Cara Romero. Our moderator for this talk is Dare Turner from the Brooklyn Museum. And I'm gonna let Dare do all of the introductions for everyone, but I wanna let all of you know that in addition to this talk, we have some other talks going on today and tomorrow, so we hope you'll come back for those. And we hope you'll enjoy the show, take a look around. Shelley's work is available to view at both Stephen Bolger Gallery and Andrew Smith Gallery, who are both, I think, in row A. And I'm gonna say that both because they're near each other. And then Cara's work is actually in my gallery's booth, Scheinbaum and Russick, so please come by and see all of them. I think they'll both be in the booths talking about their work after this conversation, so please come and take a look. Other than that, please enjoy this talk, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it and very excited. Thank you. Derek, go for it.
Super. Can we hear me okay? Yeah. So my name is Dare Turner, and I'm the Curator of Indigenous Art at the Brooklyn Museum and a member of the Yurok tribe, and I'm so excited to share a stage with these two wonderful artists here. Shelley Niro was born in Niagara Falls, New York. She is a member of the Turtle Clan Bay of Quinte Mohawk Six Nation Grand River Reserve. Niro is a practicing artist concentrating on painting, photography, and film. In 2017, she was awarded the Canada Council for the Arts Governor General Award in Visual Art, the Reveal Award from the Natition Foundation, the Dreamcatchers Visual Award, and the Scotiabank Photography Award. And Cara Romero is a contemporary fine arts photographer that draws on stories from her intertribal knowledge, collective history, and futurity. And she's known for her stage and theatrical works in a large-scale format. An enrolled member of the Chemehuevi Indian Tribe of California, Romero has held solo exhibitions in the United States, UK, and Germany. Her recent solo exhibition, Living Light, opened at the Hood Museum. And can you tell us how to say that in your Indigenous language?
Panapu Nuugai.
And that opened this year, and will travel to Phoenix Art Museum and Jacksonville. And Cara now lives and works in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So thank you both for joining me here. I've got my little list of questions that I'd love to walk through with you. And I think we can start the rotating the slides. So Shelley, I want to start with you, and I'd love to learn a bit about why you became an artist and what drew you to photography specifically.
Well, I think I grew up in an environment of people who were doing artistic things, and they didn't call themselves artists. They were people who drew, and I remember mostly going to a church, looking at the little watercolors that were on the walls of this church, and it was mostly people in traditional clothes. And, you know, I just couldn't keep my eyes away from them because they're so well done. And it was like anything you'd see anywhere, like in a book. So that's probably the beginning. And people were always making drums. And of course, beadwork was a form of artistic expression that was everybody did it. You know, it wasn't these huge embroidery things that you see today done with beadwork. It's just mostly edge beading and things that people were given and as gifts. So I think that's where my artistic practice started from.
And when did you pick up a camera?
I picked up a camera probably in 1978. And I had gone to taken a graphic arts course, and one of the courses was photography. And like I had already loved photography anyways, but I found that it was the cost of having a camera, having film, developing it, and then processing it into photographs was like, you know, it was pretty restrictive as far as cost went. But as time went on, it just became part of my practice as well.
And what about you, Cara? What drew you to art in general and then photography specifically?
I think similar to Shelley, I grew up in a community where everybody was making. So we were gathering and making baskets, and there was beadwork, and there was pottery. And I think that love of art for me was always a best friend since I was a little girl, drawing all day. It was something that kept my mind quiet and has, you know, throughout my life kept my spirit happy. I remember being particularly fascinated with the family photos and with my grandpa's Life magazine. He had a subscription to Life magazine on the reservation, and I think I always had an affinity for the photography and keeper of the photo books and the shoebox of photos, if you will. And while I was studying liberal arts at the university level, I stumbled into a black and white film class at a time when I was interested in Native studies. I was interested in changing the narrative into contemporary and lived experience and against historic and bygone that was being taught at the university of level, and really had a photography instructor that changed my life. And his name was Bill Thomas. It was at the University of Houston, and he emphasized content over technical ability. That was the first time I had picked up a camera and learned, you know, manual exposures and f-stops in 1998, and just fell in love with the darkroom and really with the storytelling aspect of photography. I felt like this vehicle of visual communication could do a lot more for what lived inside of me than words could.
I'm struck by the phrase changing the narrative and storytelling, and I'm wondering, Shelley, do those resonate with you, this idea of photography as a storytelling mechanism?
Oh, definitely. It's something that I've always wanted to do, because taking photographs is like a treasure or a gift. I used to watch film, like Hollywood films, and I'd see these actors in films and, you know, just think, what a gift for them, because they get to be seen their whole life, and if they're lucky enough, from kind of a youngish age to an older age, and it's archiving the way they look. And once I discovered photography and how to go through the process of making photos, I thought I can do the same thing with my family, my friends, people around me. I can create that archive within our own community. You know, it's not like a serious archive by any means, but at least we get to see change in ourselves as those photographs are processed and shared.
What do you mean by serious archive? What would a serious archive be versus what you create?
Well, serious archive to me is like, you know, school pictures, church picnic photographs, the dates on them, who's in the photograph, and that sort of thing, whereas that doesn't really interest me. It's more or less creating an environment of playfulness, and, you know, we can be playful amongst ourselves, and excuse me, we can be as joyful as we want to be, and really go to extremes, and we've done that too.
I want to also return back to this question of changing the narrative and maybe finding joy. I feel like I see that in a lot of your work, Cara. So where did you see that narrative start out when you were maybe in school, and what were you pressing against with your work?
Well, I think from the very beginning, really enjoyed staging photographs to like maybe recreate something that had happened, or you know, try and get across a story or an idea. Photography was so fascinating for me because everything that I grew up with had been done outside of culture, with the exception of like point and shoot inside the homes. And I think that kind of seriousness of like the ethnographic photographers from the turn of the century and the stoic nature of, you know, photographing Native people from outside of culture, there's a real power in the editing nature of photography, like what you're going to show, what stories are important to you versus what stories are important to people from outside of culture. And, you know, we have a lot of sense of humor in our communities. There's a lot of joy. I think through you know, colonization and all of the heavy changes that have happened, you know, humor is medicine. And I think that that's what I really wanted to see. That's what I see in my community. We work from autobiography, and we work from the, you know, our own sense of place and our own sense of culture and community, and that's where the joy comes from. You know, that's where the laughter comes from. And while we can, of course, be serious, that for me is, you know, how I want us to see ourselves.
When you think about, Shelley, when you're thinking about representing your community, you know, what does that mean to you? What sort of stories are you putting forward? I'm looking at some of your older work versus the newer material, and I feel like some shifts there, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
I'm trying to think, I'm trying to be imaginative in the work, I'm trying to be inventive, and I'm hoping that the work itself will be stimulating to people who see it. And, you know, stimulation is such an important role, I think, because so far, or not so far, but so many times I think that we get stuck in a corner and saying, this is how we have to represent ourselves, and this is how, you know, we're kind of there, and people are expecting us to portray ourselves in a certain way. And that kind of just makes me want to go the other way. And it's like, you know, there's so many degrees in our life. There's not just this 5-degree angle that we can look out at the world at. We have 360 degrees, and that's the kind of parameters that I like to think that I work in. And once you start throwing away those parameters of what to expect or what people are expecting or what, how far your imagination can go, it's like you can do anything you want to do, you know? So that's when it gets a little bit crazy.
Or freeing, you know,
Yeah.
I love that. Cara, you know, you work a lot of times with people outside of your community, but who are still Native. What does it mean to represent their culture?
That's a great question. Here again, I think a lot of it comes from autobiography. As all of us as artists, despite where we're from, we're communicating things that we know and our lived experience. From within community, I think that there's a gentler and maybe like deeper insight when it comes to like stories that come from the landscape and individual people, and really like that connection to the Mojave Desert where I'm from. I went to tribal college, you know, and that was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's a big intertribal community. And so this becomes part of our lived experience often when we leave the reservation and end up in cities or metropolitan areas. There's another placemaking that happens. And so I think the beauty of that placemaking of Native people in the cities is not just shared struggles, but shared stories and shared sensitivities, and really like the beauty of, you know, being in these isolated communities that are deep in culture and coming together is kind of like another extra family, you know, and we fall in love and we have children and we visit each other's communities, and we're all held to, I think, really strict cultural protocols, and I think there's a deep understanding of that. And we have a lot of things in common, you know?
Like what?
I think some of the mythos overlaps, some of our star stories overlap. Certainly the ways that we have been both absent and present in photography over the last 100 years. So, how we feel about our bodies, how we feel about histories that may or may not have been told completely. And I think that there's definitely still a sensitivity that it's still coming from within culture, that storytelling intertribally. I also feel like when you put a Native person and a Native woman behind the camera, that there's a really powerful shift, because there's things that are much more collaborative. There's understanding for how the medium has caused harm in our communities. And so I think just with that understanding, you're already going to approach the collaboration as something very different. People are going to have agency. You're going to have an understanding for, what may or may not be correct to depict in story. And lots of conversations and fun, and usually my shoots are very like playing with imagination and making sure everybody is feeling really good about what we're doing.
Shelley, when you're thinking about creating a new work, where do you start? Where do you find the inspiration, and how do you really enact what is in your mind's eye?
Usually the ideas come to me pretty fast. Like we're looking at the shirt here. This is made in, the idea came up in 2002, and I went through with it in 2003, 1 year after. I was visiting, now I went to this photo conference in Houston, and I saw my friends Holeatis Najini and Veronica Pasalakwa, and I asked them if they would be a part of this idea I got on an airplane just as I was flying over Texas. And I could look down and I could see the land below me. It looked like a quilt. And I just thought, everything is so neatly packed. And then I started thinking of the Comanches and what they had to go through when they're struggling to hold on to their territory. And then the idea of the shirt just kind of zoomed in on me. And then 1 year later, that's when George Bush made this attack on Iraq. And so with the words that I came up with, it sort of resonated with the time that was going on. And I said, do you want to do this? And they said, of course. They said they would, which I was really happy about, because I thought, who can I get to wear those shirts? And Hale was, she's a perfect person to put those shirts on. And so that's where that idea just kind of zoomed through me but it took me about a year to have it made and produced. And it was also made into a video. And that video showed at the Venice Biennale 2003, I believe. But that video kind of went around all over the place, because somebody came up to me and said, I saw that video in Russia. So, well, that's interesting. So sometimes, the idea is really quick and fast. Sometimes I really have to think about them. Like this one here, which is mohawks and beehives. And I've talked about this piece for a long time, and I've talked about it many times, but this work happened after Oka crisis in Quebec in 1990. And it was during a time when the town of Oka wanted to take over a grave site, which was on the Oka Reserve. And Oka put up a big resistance because they said, no, you can't have our graveyard. They wanted to expand a golf course. Anyways, it turned into this huge turmoil between Oka Mohawks and the town of Oka, and which became this huge crisis with the army. The army even came out, and one Oka policeman was killed, which really made it a really horrible incident. Anyways, every day that summer, the newspapers really condemned Mohawks. And I think they must have started out with Oka Mohawks, but then it spread to Mohawks in general. And you could find a newspaper and it said, Mohawks are doing this and they're doing this. And it was just so obvious to me what they were doing. And then it spread to being just Native people in Canada. Native people are soaking up social service money, and they're using up all your taxes and all the sort. It's the usual story. So it was having an effect on me. I started to get a little bit depressed by the whole confrontation of the media. In February, I asked my sisters if they would be interested in being a part of my work, and they said they would. And I said, we're going to get dressed up, and we're going to go downtown Brantford, which is the city I'm from, and we're just going to, go in front of statues. There's a statue of Joseph Brant there. We're going to go to the restaurants. We're going to be noisy. We're just going to be really kind of obnoxious, but controlled obnoxious. And so it was a day. It was so much fun, and they really had a great time, and their job was done. Then it took me a few more months just to get that series finished, and I forget where it was shown first. I think it was shown at the Woodland Center in Brantford. But it's just those kind of ideas that sometimes you have to work really hard at. This one was not as hard, this shirt idea, but Mohawks and Beehives was a lot of work.
Do you think it was a lot of work because you were reckoning with what was going on in the world at that time?
It was because it seemed like it was detrimental to Native people. It was Native people are bad, and it was done in such a way that people start to believe that. But it's also kind of ridiculous too, because there would be protests going on, and there was one in Hamilton, which is about half an hour away from where I live, and this one woman, there were a lot of non-Native people coming to these protests in support of Mohawks, I guess, and I really got turned off, and I didn't go to any more protests after this because she had a sign, "Have you given a Mohawk a hug today?" I said, okay, time for me to get back to the dark room. So it gets kind of ridiculous, yeah.
Cara, does this resonate with you? Sometimes work comes really easily, and other times you have to deliberate and think through or push against something going on in history or in your life at a time.
I can definitely relate to that, and even what Shelley was talking about. Sometimes you have this idea, and then you're looking to your friends and family, like you said, Hulea, and you're like, this is the perfect person for this idea. And then sometimes maybe a person will inspire the idea, a story that they've told, or maybe will spark an idea for collaboration. And I don't think we ever know exactly where it's going to come from. And that's kind of the magic of, being an artist and, being open to daydreaming, I think, a lot, and living in your imagination and kind of sussing through ideas and deciding whether it's good or not. I think for me also I grew up with my grandma, my dad's mother, and she was always full of inspirational words. I remember when she was 80, I was like, when did you become a wizard, Grandma? It just seemed like she knew so much, and I think so many of the elders in our community are so, they just have so much wisdom, and they see our young people struggling with where they want their life to go, unsure of is it okay to be an artist? Is it okay to be a photographer? And there were some people really early on that I think were teachers and other artistic mediums, and they would say things like, I remember learning to sew and shugi. I couldn't get this one part right on the cuff, and it was close, but it was still a little ratty looking. And I said, do I have to do it again? And she said, it's your art. And she walked off. And I don't know why that, still stays with me. We're often, tearing it all apart and, starting over. I think that's an inspiration. I can remember Willetta really talking about where, we learn to dance in our communities. And like there's a great humiliation that can happen, you know, when you're learning to do something in any culture, in any community, when you don't know how to do something. And she imparted this idea that dancing and art, even more than dancing, was between yourself and creator, and that nobody else mattered, you know, and that is something that I think when I'm sussing through the different ideas and maybe something seems weird or, you know, you've gone too far now, that actually, you know, it's this like really intimate conversation between you and whatever you're having that really spiritual conversation with. And that's when it's really important to press in my, like, you know, so if you're having an idea and you're sensing that you're supposed to go there, then you have to go, you know. So.
I think about, you know, both of you stage so beautifully. I wonder if you can speak about what it is to help maybe your loved ones feel confident and be ready to be photographed and really sort of channel what you're hoping to capture in photography. Shelley, I'm thinking about, you know, this is a beautiful example, but you already spoke about that. I wonder if you want to speak about The Rebel.
Yeah, the Rebel is my mother, and it was taken in 1982, and I was visiting her, and just before I was about to leave, I said, let me take a photo of you. So my husband had worked on this car called the AMC Rebel, and it was there in the driveway, and so she jumped up on it, and she just, you know, went into her little pose, and it's like so cool. And
She is.
and she just loved participating. You know, she loved to be playful and just, you know, be there for the moment. And that film or that photo is, you know, gone all over the world. And she's not with us today, but if she knew where the photo was, she'd be so happy.
Oh, and Cara, you photograph your daughter fairly often, is that right? I wonder if you want to speak about that, you know, thinking about these mother-daughter exchanges through art.
I love that photo. I can remember the very first time I saw it in art school, and it really resonated with me as a young person. And a lot of times seeing Shelley's work early on, it made me feel like I was headed in the right direction. Like there was a sense of humor that I understood right away that this was another Native woman in her community making art and just kind of having fun, you know. I think that the beauty in our own backyard is infinite, and it just seems like there's no shortage of stories and people that I haven't gotten to see everywhere else, but I got to grow up with and see every day, you know, whether it's like laughter or stories or things that, you know, are interesting content-wise. That part, I think, in our community comes really easily. And I like to work with people that are not professional. It's much slower for me, so I have friends that are working in fashion, and you know, people will ask every once in a while, you know, will you do this commercial thing? And I'm like, oh, it's so fast. There's so much pressure, you know. But in our communities and with our friends and family, there's a lot less pressure, you know, to be fast. And sometimes, like, I'll go home at the end of May and I'm already talking to some people about, you know, like, let's work together. I'm talking about for like days at a time, you know, like, let's play for a little while, you know, and see what happens. The same, you know, my daughter is larger than life on film, and she's really kind of a otherworldly being, I guess. And I think also when you're working with like mother-daughter, sometimes I look at the photos of my daughter and even my other children, and when they're looking right at you and there's this level of comfort, then when it becomes a photograph, there's some other like intimate thing that happens for people that are not in that incredibly trusting relationship. And I think that that's, you know, the engagement of the eyes and the gaze is really pretty wonderful.
I wonder, Shelley, if you could speak about how the field, or maybe your practice and then the field at large, have transformed over the course of your career.
I feel like I'm always catching up because I started with a Canon, film camera, and it always felt like I was, I have to get a better enlarger. And so finally I got a really great enlarger, and I think I had it for about a year and a half. And then I went back to get supplies, and that's when they stopped selling supplies in the store. Like, what? I got this great enlarger. So I had to go digital. And, going digital was like, I had to get my brain and really twist it in my own head to figure out how to work the camera and just go through the whole process of learning digital all over, or not all over again, but just learning digital. And I feel like I'm still struggling because it's always a process. And it's like, I feel like there's so much to know that I won't become totally aware of what you can do with this camera. But it's also kind of interesting and exciting. When I first got my digital camera and started figuring it out, it's like so easy, it's just there, as opposed to film where you have to take the picture, process the film, do it in the darkroom, all this sort of thing. So I had to go through all these steps. Digital is like click, you got a picture. And of course you realize that you have to do more steps in this whole process to get a better picture. But it's exciting, it's something that, like, this is a digital image right here that I've worked on, and I'm so happy because I would not have been able to produce that image in my regular film camera. And I think the digital process has really allowed me to, bring things in that I didn't know I had at my fingertips.
What about you, Cara? Have you seen big shifts in the field or within your practice as new tools become available?
I think since I started in 35 millimeter black and white, it's changed 1,000%. I never imagined. I think sometimes it still goes back to the capture of light and time. Sometimes I still feel like no matter how much everything has changed, there's still that, and there's still these like foundational things of like, was it a good exposure? Was it in focus? These like very classical things that we learn as photographers. I straddled film and digital and really resisted going to digital, but I felt like I had to in the early 2000s. And I think that was really difficult wanting to be a fine artist, because I think particularly like fine art photographers were extra resistant to this idea of digital arriving for like a decade. It was like, no, we're just not gonna go there. Simultaneously, I learned it, and then I did learn photo illustration. And at some point, like the digital, like the resolution and this idea of photo illustration seemed to arrive. And I found it kind of like you, a little bit liberating. Once I started doing whatever I wanted and not worried too much about the reception in the gallery world or in the fine art world, I was able to introduce ideas of like, otherworldliness or supernatural ideas or things that, but at the same time, they were only really, really good if you could do as much as you possibly could in camera. And I felt like, okay, well now I'm using this digital workflow, but it would never be as good if I didn't know how to do this on film, or at least 90 to 95% of it, So even when the corn is floating around the astronaut, we strung every single one of those corn cobs up with fishing line, like the way you would have done it in the 80s and 90s. And,
Why? Like, what does that afford you by being able to set the stage that way?
I think it just goes back to why we maybe fell in love with the process. I think that as far as digital goes, there's something magic about what happens in the actual rendering, whether it's the fall off or the perspective. It's like you can't ever quite approach it the same way in digital. So it's kind of like a best of both in some ways. And Photoshop is it can be very painterly. You could be really fast with it, or you can be really have great intention. And I feel like the best photo illustrators can paint and draw, because there's an understanding of where to put the line and how to make things look great. So.
Speaking of the transformations you've seen, looking forward, Shelley, what are your hopes and wishes for future generations of Native artists or Native photographers?
Well, I think there's an area that we are not really exploring as much as we could, and I think it's the area of the dream world. And I think that once we become adept at technology, I think it's places and worlds that, we can go much further. And I don't think we have to explain where we're going or what we're doing, but I think it's something that we can just conceptually just like hold on to and really go further than we have. And it's all about, it's all about money, people having cameras, people having the equipment to do that, and letting ideas just sort of become resolved and grow. And I think that's really exciting. Like Cara's, not this one, but Cara's image of her 3 sisters. Are they your sisters?
No.
Are they sisters with each other?
But I think, that image is really so fascinating. Like, that's Cara's dream world, and I love it. It's, it's pretty exploratory. But I think that we can just, keep going and going, never stopping.
I'm glad you liked that one. That was one of those where I was like, you've gone too far now. The question was, what do I want for future generations?
Yeah.
I think that encouragement to explore the medium, not just the medium of photography, but art can be so healing. I think still goes back to me as like a spiritual path. It's a way to spend your time and your gifts and your experience, and it can come in so many different forms, So I really want our kids off their phones and making art, working with their hands or whatever inspires them, whether it's, cooking or, art can come in so many forms. For the medium of photography, I think it goes back to probably what you and I both struggled with, and that is, I think a lot of times kids from different communities can't afford it, and they don't have the means to invest in being able to make photographs. I remember a lot of times in school, like, why did you pick this? There were a lot of times that I almost quit because I couldn't afford the paper, or I couldn't afford the film, or now the software or the technology. And so I think, I hope that people can learn to invest in themselves, that it's like a radical act of self-care for our communities, and that it's a worthwhile thing. And we can always eat beans and rice, right? but buy the camera, buy whatever you need to make what's in your imagination. And I think being able to see ourselves, by our own hand, I think is something that I want to continue seeing. That's something that's drastically changed in our lifetime. Seeing ourselves in museum shows and seeing ourselves at the APAD show is not just inspiring for kids from our communities, but it's inspiring for me. Like, I never imagined, that it would take us this far.
And it's inspiring for me, and I imagine some of the audience too. And with that, I want to actually open it up for Q&A. Do any of you have questions you would like to ask? I see a hand. You feel like you can have a loud voice, or we got a mic coming for you?
Thank you very much. Many contemporary Indigenous artists get their first opportunity in the marketplace at Indian Market in Santa Fe. Did either of you exhibit or sell at Indian Market? And if so, how would you contrast that, that fair versus, say, APAD in terms of audience and opportunities?
I've never sold or exhibited there.
I'm an expert. It's a great question that I often don't get to talk about, but when I was in tribal college, I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, so here in the States, that's the only formal art training, and it brought a lot of that intertribal community to Santa Fe that had started the Southwest Association of Indian Arts. It is an art market that brings, 500 booths to downtown Santa Fe and really changed the landscape of Native art here in the United States. It's the largest Native American art show in the world. And with that is a really complex landscape. And that was all I ever wanted to do. That was as big as it got when I was in school. I was like, man, if one day I could just show at art market, I would be set. And my first year to be able to do that was 2005. I took a break and moved back home to the reservation, being a mom, and came back to Santa Fe in around 2009. And it was about 2012, I was like, I'm gonna do this show and I'm gonna do the Herd Indian Market in Phoenix. And I would say in 2012, we were not seeing the amount of contemporary Native art in museums, in solo shows, in group shows. We hadn't quite made it into the contemporary American art world. So there were like some really overt omissions that had happened for the last 100 years, and we were very segregated to Native art collections, and that changed pretty fast. I would say over the past 10 or 15 years since I've been doing market. There are a lot of museums and a lot of curators that come to that show. I think so many that it would surprise a lot of people that have not been out to SWAIA. I think more than that, for our own community, it is like more like a ceremony than like a typical art convention. It's a lot of work. We set up our own booths. They're 10 by 10. It's a lot more like grassroots, if you will. And you can see just about every style of art from our community that goes back hundreds of years to people that are really trying to innovate and do something different. I think what's so great about that is that it's self-driven from communities, so it's not controlled by galleries. You have a really intimate interface with the Native people from all over, and I think cross-culturally that really helps people change that, what were you saying, 5 degrees of an idea about what Native people or what Native art is. We have 10,000 different stories of Native art, from sculpture to photography to painting, diverse art forms, textiles, beadwork. So it's like, what do you say, apples to oranges as far as this show to the SWAIA show. But I think it's really important for us to be here in these spaces as well, because it is being seen as an artist for our art, as opposed to it just being like race or politically based. And so I think it's a both and for me.
Thank you for that question. Who else has a question?
Thank you for being here. You both work with playfulness in your work, and you also have these cosmic elements as well. So could you both speak about sort of the celestial influence in your works?
I think it's it's something that I don't start out by saying I'm going to make a celestial piece, but most often I think about that element in the work itself and bring it in because I think it's important to keep looking at the stars and the sky and the moon, especially if we live in urban areas. It's something that we take for granted quite a bit. The piece that has Raven by Night, there's 4 photographs in that work, and I'm so interested in nighttime photography. I haven't managed to get one photo of it that I'm really happy with. To me, it looks like dust. It's like, you could put anything on a black cloth and that would be my nighttime shot. Mm-hmm. But I want to work at that. I've been taking photos of the moon, which I really love doing because most often it's getting up like at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm living in a city and I'm lucky enough to be able to shoot the moon and get some pretty nice shots. But it's also being outside taking those shots is really it's something that I've gotten away from because I grew up on the reserve and it was always, at nighttime there were no street lights around or anything. And the sound of night is different than it is in a city. But when I do get up and shoot my moon shots, it's so peaceful. I just love it. I'm tempted to wake up my husband and say, hey, come on outside with me. It's so great, look. But I don't do that. The one that has my granddaughter in the photograph, she was 12 at the time, and she was, just one of those teenage girls just coming into womanhood. She was really grouchy. She had long hair, and she said, I'm going to cut my hair. And I said, okay, you can do that, but I want to take a picture of it first. So taking that photograph was quite the workout because I had to set up a scaffold. I had her laying down on the ground. I had her hair pulled out so that we could see it. And I think that took about, a couple hours, 3 hours. Went home, looked at my photos. We got to do that again, which is fun. She doesn't live too far away from me. But
Did she cut her hair after this?
she did. But I want to make a point of having her hair in my photograph. And those sticks that are there are from a friend who was cutting down her bushes around her house. And I said, can I have your sticks? And she said, yeah, okay. So brought her sticks to my house, and they're separately photographed than having my granddaughter there. So it's an image of sticks, an image of my granddaughter, an image of the moon, an image of the sky, and it's all sandwiched together so that I got that really great shot of her. And I'm really happy because, I like to think about night shots. That's all.
Yeah, I've never been asked that question before, so I really had to think about it. I think maybe, I don't know about your homelands, but ours are really rural and you can see the stars a lot better on the Mojave. Like, it's one of the things that you can just go outside and see, more stars than you've ever seen in your life. I think the use of the celestial for me is I'm not so thoughtful all the time when I'm making, like, this is what I'm doing. It's more a little bit intuitive, but if I look back at some of the pieces, it's, they're dreamscapes, and so it is kind of, I think it lends itself to being of the imagination or of the cosmos. It kind of takes us out of the linear time. And so I think it shows up not just in some of the futurism work, but in some of the storytelling work also. It kind of adds something dreamy about it. So.
Do we think we have time for one more? Yeah.
Hi, Cara. So you had both mentioned admiring each other's work, and I was interested in how those genealogies and those communities affect like what you start to produce, how your work changes as you see your fellow photographers' work, and it inspires you?
I think for me, there was this idea of becoming a native photographer and very little available to me in the late 90s. I think when you're starting out in art school, you're often studying what other people have done. And, as a native person, the oddness of looking at Curtis and things like that is a lot to unpack. And I feel often later in life so fortunate to have gone to the Institute of American Indian Arts, because I don't know if I had been studying art any other place, if I would have gotten to learn about our own art history and our own movements within the Native world. So I was able to see, the photographers that came before me that were making work. For me, that was inspiring to know that there were other odd birdies out. No, I'm just joking. that it was okay, to have this deep desire to love this medium and want to use it in this way that maybe not a lot of people had done, and to see not just Shelley but Zig's and Hulea's and Lee Marmon's work. All resonated with me deeply at a really young age, because they made me, I think more than anything, feel like it was okay. And that our aesthetic was totally different from, what a lot of people considered Native photography. That sense of humor was okay. That ideas of identity, that staging, that putting things in modern context, all of these things are very simple, but as a young artist, it's just comforting to know that there were some great photographers to look to.
When I started doing photography, I was born in 1954, and so many of the people that I was surrounded with, didn't hardly have TVs, and when we did, it was very limited. So looking at art, looking at photography was really kind of a limiting experience. And I remember trying to start out making my own images, and often it was because Southwestern images were out there more than I think than anything else. I think we all kind of copied it without knowing what we were doing. And as time goes on, we've now realized, this is Southwestern, this is Eastern, this is Northern Ontario. We have really become educated within our own cultural areas that we now are aware of different things. And but we used to get so excited by seeing anything coming from anywhere. And I just think, I remember, even Edward Curtis, he was exciting because he was the only person making any kind of images of Native people. But I think that now we're in a position where we can really understand and really appreciate so many different other people and what they're doing and the areas that are coming from. And I don't know, it's just amazing. I'm just amazed.
Maybe last one.
Thank you. I really appreciate the themes that you talked about. Cara, you mentioned being open to dreaming, and Shelley, you said it's important to dream. So I wanted to ask you about how you weave the themes of spirituality that comes from your culture within your work, and if this is too broad, then if you have a sort of formula that would express ethical imperative that you live by, and that is expressed also in your work.
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how.
I think some of it is just kind of intuitive when you're wanting to tell a story through the particular medium. I do think that there's for sure limits about what would be appropriate to share from our communities. And I guess that's why it's so important that we do tell our own stories, because it comes very easily, like, to know, you know, what you can share and what you can't share. You know, coyote stories, yes. You know, funeral rites, no. You know, so I mean, it's just a very, like, kind of intuitive like area to work in. As far as the spirituality, I think that we're just lucky to be on the same panel together. You know, I think both of our work is really coming from a place where we're throwing that autobiography into the work with our communities, and I guess that's the best I can answer that question.
Yeah, I think if you're not hurting other people's feelings or offending people, like, I sometimes feel maybe they're offended by that, but I don't know that they're offended, and I don't know why they're offended. But I think that's kind of my number one rule, like, don't hurt people's feelings.
Yeah. I feel like those are good words to just live by.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you both for sharing wisdom with us and just being generous with your speaking about your practice. This was really inspiring, and I hope you all feel inspired as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dare.
Thank you.